All right, so welcome everyone. I'm Michael Watanabe, the Deputy Executive Officer for the Office of Public School Construction. Presenting with me today, or moderating this meeting with me today, is Brian LePasque, OPSC's Chief of Program Services. This is the first stakeholder meeting for the implementation of Proposition 2, so we're quite excited about that one. It is the first meeting of many more to come. We are currently planning these to have them on regularly scheduled Thursday morning meetings so that we have some consistency of what to expect going forward over the next several months. But all our meetings will be advertised via our website, via our email distribution lists. You can sign up for our email list on our website under the Contact Us link. We'll try to notice all these things at least 10 days in advance, give you some notice of what topics we intend to cover. And then just like our state allocation board meetings, we'll try to get the agenda out at least a week in advance with the topics and our initial thoughts on those. These meetings are intended to be an open dialogue. As or staff are presenting items, feel free to use the raise hand function in Zoom and we'll call you out. You're welcome to ask questions. If we don't, and so each of these stakeholder items, if we don't get any feedback, if it seems like everyone's good with the proposals, we will go to the next state allocation board meeting that's available to start presenting the regs to the board for approval. But if we do have a lot of feedback, a lot of comments, we will bring all those back to future stakeholder meetings. So there'll be plenty of opportunities to comment and weigh in on the various issues and topics. All of these meetings, if you can't make them, will be posted to our web page and our YouTube channel. So links are available for our websites there. We try to get those up within 2 days after the meeting. So we try to get that quick, enough time that if you missed the meeting, you can still watch them and submit written comments after the meeting. So we'll do that too. All right. And lastly, before I hit the first topic, just want to let everyone know, thank all of OPSC staff. They have been working on these stakeholder meeting items for the last 2 months since the basically the minute the proposition passed, we jumped and hit off the ground running on these. Under the guidance of our senior managers and supervisors, a lot of these staff, it's their first time developing a program, writing regulations, and they all embraced it full-heartedly. So we hope you like what you see here. And with that, I'll screen share and come right in. Set windows around. All right. You see my screen okay? Someone give me a thumbs up. Ryan? Okay. Thank you. All right. So if you're following along, the agenda is on our website under the meetings tab. So you can download this entire agenda here, but I'll try to walk through the highlights as we go through each item. And like I mentioned, if you have any questions as I go along, feel free to raise your hand. You can drop notes in the chat too. Brian will be monitoring that and he'll feed me those questions read, or he'll answer them directly in the chat, one or the other. We intend to hit multiple topics under each stakeholder meeting. So each item will have a cover and the topics we intend to cover. So for this particular meeting, we're covering 5 different topics, and then you'll see in the PDF, each topic will have its own set of attachments, authority tied to it, to keep them grouped together. And the idea behind that is so that each topic, in theory, as we finish each one, we can grab that whole section and present it to the state allocation board in groups. We're trying to combine regulatory package just to save time and move it through OAL faster if we can. So that's kind of the intent behind that one. On the cover each one, you'll see on page at the end of each cover item, there will be an opportunity to provide feedback after this meeting, and I'll reiterate this at the end of the meeting. If you have any comments that you didn't want to speak to publicly, you just want to send them in writing, you can send it to our communications team at this email address found below. For this first stakeholder meeting, we're asking for our comments by noon, February 14th. So generally about 2 weeks for written feedback to us after the fact. All right, going on to the first topic. So our first topic, what we did in this first group of stakeholder meetings is kind of hit what we consider some of the easier items that are in Proposition 2. knock those out, move those along, and then we go on to the meatier topics as we go along. The first topic we're talking about here is the financial hardship qualifying criteria. This one is pretty straightforward. Financial hardship, if you're not aware of it, are for school districts that under our normal new construction project, it's a 50-50 match program. For modernization, it's 60-40, with the state picking up 60% of the project costs and the district picking up 40%. But if you meet the qualifying criteria in statute and regulations, you can have up to 100% of your required local match covered by the state. There's 5 criteria that you can qualify under the initial step for getting into the program. And what Proposition 2 did is increase the maximum level of total bonding capacity that a district could have from 5 million to 15 million to automatically qualify for the program. So that's one of the changes. What you'll see on our attachment A1B at the very top, we've had to make a subdivision under the financial hardship regs with 2 criteria. So we are processing applications received prior to October 30th, on or before October 30th of 2024. Those particular projects that were submitted in that time are subject to the old rules as they read in statute January 1st of 2024. So they are still subject to the 5 million rule. So we had to put a distinguishing subdivisions A and B up there for before and after 10/31 of 2024. The $15 million statute does now, the original $5 million has been in there since the inception of the program, never been adjusted, and we know that. So what they did in Proposition 2, it'll actually be adjusted for inflation annually, with the first adjustment beginning July 1st of 2026. So that's kind of good for the program. That 15 million should, in theory, creep up each year. And so each year as that happens, we'll present that to the board of what the new dollar amount each year. So the other part of this regulation, or this package that we're proposing today, this is not a change as a result of Proposition 2, but because we are touching these financial hardship regs, we'd like to formally implement what we like to formally implement it is our bridge financing policy. So for those who have been around a while, back in 2008, during the fiscal crisis, the state allocation board no longer had the ability to borrow money from the pooled money investment account to front fund our projects until bond sales occurred. There's a way to get cash out the door quickly, but that disappeared back in 2008 and really hasn't come back as an option since then. So since 2008, to help school districts that are financial hardship and needed money or needed to start a project, the board set a bridge financing policy. And essentially what that does is allows a district to borrow from their other funds that they have locally or other short-term borrowing instruments and basically start their project. They would do that with the permission of OPSC. The school board wouldn't have to adopt a board resolution acknowledging that they are only temporary funding because the intent is to apply for state funding, and that once state funding is received, they will reimburse their local funds for wherever the original source of funds are. And we've been doing this since 2009, but it's never been in regulation. So what we've proposed on PDF page 18 is regulations to formalize what we've been doing. So everything on here, you'll see a lot of underlining for new text for this bridge financing policy. Nothing in here is new to what we've already been doing. We're just formalizing so everyone knows what the policy is formally and making it clear on the expectations. So some of the key points, text is there for you to read. I won't go through it line by line, but basically we will need a board resolution in advance, identifying the scope of the work of the project that you are borrowing for, indicating your intent that once you receive state funds, you have to pay back your original source of funds in 60 days. After you pay back those funds, then you need to provide information to OPSC within 30 days, showing us the accounting ledgers, documenting that process, basically to prove that you paid yourself back. If you do not do that, any expenditures that will count towards district contribution toward the project and lower any potential financial hardship funding that you may receive on that project. So these regulations basically formalize everything we've been doing before. We do have sample board resolutions on our website on the financial hardship services page for you to use as a template as well. Those are the same ones that have been there for ages as well. So with that, those are the two main topics for the financial hardship changes we're doing today. I'll pause there to see if we have any questions from anyone. Right.
Casey has a raised hand.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Regina has a comment, question.
Hi, I'm in the regulations. It states that the district has to provide the exact amount, and I don't know that that's always able to be determined ahead. Is it possible to do up to amount instead?
Jason Hernandez from our financial hardship team is here, and he can clarify that one. I believe we take up to amounts. You can't go beyond that amount. If you do, you do need an updated board resolution. Jason, can you confirm?
No, whenever possible, we ask for the exact amount. If we know there's times when the district will not know the exact amount, but yeah, Michael's right. There should be up to, because we have to have some limit. We can't take it without an amount, because we had that question a couple of weeks ago that they didn't know yet. They had an estimate. Well, then and then ask, can we put it basically an up to amount, and then can we come back and amend the bridge financing policy if we have to go beyond that amount? And you can't amend it, but you can come back and do a second board resolution. I think Michael kind of touched on that. So if you're going to go past the original amount you had as 10 million and you need to go up to 12, then you need to go back to the school board and get a second board resolution for that additional 2 million. But you do have that option to do. But the important part is just to make sure that you do it, because anything, and then don't spend beyond the 10 million before you have that second board resolution approved. Because if there's a time gap in between the two board resolutions, then we would look at, okay, when was the last of those 10 million in expenditures made? When did they go beyond the 10 million, and when was the date of the second board resolution? But you do have that option to come back, and definitely want at least to have something that gives you a max amount, or like Michael said, up to amount is what we're looking for.
Alana, we have one more question here.
Good.
Good morning. I'm Alana Cunningham from Jack Schrader's office, and I don't know if this is the appropriate time for this question or not, but I kind of have a big picture question regarding financial hardship and small districts who are not in a position to borrow from themselves or borrow from someone else to front the money to design a project. So for example, now if a district were to submit a design application, it would take them at least 3 years to get that design money. By then, the bond funds will be spoken for, and those financial hardship districts are at a disadvantage. And I'm wondering if there's any provisions in Prop 2 that may provide a provision to allow districts to reserve the funds when the design application is submitted.
Yeah, so good question. In Proposition 2, there is a new small school district program for those school districts with 2,500 or fewer enrollment in their school districts. We'll bring that back at the next stakeholder meeting that's planned for February 13th to kind of talk that in more detail. But just as a kind of a quick heads up, what we're kind of envisioning there is, under that small school district program, what it creates is a new thing called the preliminary apportionment. And we've used preliminary apportionments in other programs such as charter and the critically overcrowded school programs, where what will allow this small school district to do is submit an application for a preliminary apportionment. It would set aside bond authority for the entire projected total project cost based on eligibility at that time. And we'd save that bond authority for them for up to 4 years with a possible time extension in there allowed in a statute as well. During that 4 years, if they are financial hardship, it would allow an advance release of design funds, similar to the program that runs now. And one of the benefits of having the preliminary apportionment is now a school district can proceed with moving forward on their project from a design standpoint and knowing by the time they submit the construction application with DSA approved plans that bond authority is waiting for them there, provided that meet that 4-year deadline. So there will be a mechanism to help small school districts out from that aspect. That should close that gap.
Okay, so that will work for small financial hardship school districts, but it wouldn't work for school districts over 2,500 pupils. So it would be based on the small school district requirement, not financial hardship.
Correct.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, we got a couple of questions in the chat. The first one's from Steve Martinez. It says, has OPSC quantified how many school districts who were previously eligible for financial hardship assistance will be disqualified with bonding capacity change? I think it's more or less, right?
It actually goes the other way. By raising the bonding capacity to 15 million, it allows more people to qualify. So under the what we call phase 1 criteria, if your bonding capacity was 5 million or less, you automatically qualify for the financial hardship program. And then we will look at how much proceeds the district has in their fund accounts to fund any part of their share. By raising to 15 million, it means more school districts should be eligible. So now anyone 15 million or less of a bonding capacity now qualifies for the financial hardship program. So we expect that to drop down.
Then the next question is from Mika, and it says, we are 2,593 enrollment. Does it mean we can apply as a small district?
Yeah, that's correct. That is explicit in statute, the definition of a small school district as 2,500 or fewer pupils.
And then one more question from Caroline Brown. Would there ever be an instance for a negative adjustment on the bonding capacity?
Jason, are you aware of any where that would happen?
You mean is if because they work off that index and it goes down, would they? I don't know how that.
Yeah, I guess that's possible if inflation goes the other way.
Possibly, yeah. Because it's just working directly off of that inflation index.
Yeah. And it's an adjustment based on statute change. So OPSC will not be making that calculation. We actually, I believe we get that from CD is where we get that inflation adjustment from. We get that one. Any other questions on the financial hardship item? All right, we can come back to that one if there is. And then to Regina's question, the regs for us listing a specific amount, we can tweak that a little bit, that language, just to clarify the up to as allowable also as we present it to the state allocation board for approval. All right. The next one, next topic has to do with eligible expenditures under the new construction modernization program. This item is capturing more global changes throughout our proposition to implementation. This topic will cover 3 different things in this area. One is a small school clock, modernization eligibility as it relates to military bases, and then some corresponding form changes. So the first one has to do with the small school district, what we call lock. And I will skip to page 39 for the reg text. The reg text is relatively simple for this one. Under the new construction program right now, new construction eligibility is based on your 5-year enrollment projection, where you think how much enrollment you will have 5 years from now. And we compare that to your building inventory in your school district. Is if there's a gap and you have a net need for new construction pupils to house 5 years from now, that creates your new construction baseline. For small school districts, your small changes in enrollment can actually have a large impact in your new construction eligibility. So under the current program and applications submitted prior to October 30th, the eligibility was locked in for 3 years, meaning we didn't refresh it at the time we funded your application as long as it went to the board within 3 years from the board approving it. under the new statute under Proposition 2, they've increased that to 5 years. So it now goes from a 3-year lock to a 5-year lock based on when the board approves your new construction eligibility for your district. That's really the only change to that particular one, and it does kind of align nicely with the small school district program to carve out, where the preliminary apportionment is valid for up to 5 years too as well. So a simple wording change for that particular one in the item. The second change for modernization eligibility, and sorry, we overlap pages here for page 20 for the PDF. Under modernization eligibility, currently permanent buildings generate modernization on a site if your permanent buildings are at least 25 years old, and portables if you're 20 years old. Prop 2 added an amendment to statute that specified that if you have a school facility located on a military base and you are the recipient of a federal grant for the site that requires a local matching share, you're now eligible for an apportionment after 10 years for both permanent and portable buildings. With that, though, that also requires you to take those portable buildings and replace them with permanent classroom. So we've made corresponding reg changes to account for that. There are several sections that are impacted in regulation. The first one just being your modernization eligibility calculation. So we are specifying this is a corresponding reg to match statute that basically does what statute does. We count your inventory after 10 years. We've also added in this paragraph down here, specifying what statute already says. If you are replacing a portable classrooms, you have to replace it with permanent classrooms, and also that new modernization eligibility. So we call it second round mod. The next time you come in for modernization eligibility, it'll be based on that permanent classroom building. So 3 parts of .60 touched right here. The other part we are doing is in 1859.61. And essentially what this is doing is once we take what we call a snapshot of your facilities, we don't adjust the inventory of classrooms on the site. In this case, we would adjust for these new permanent classrooms so that we can count them in the future as permanent classrooms for any portables. So this is just specifying that we're going to increase the number of permanent classrooms on your campus and reduce the number of portables on your campus for doing this replacement project with mod eligibility. So it should be pretty straightforward for there. And then lastly, as part of this item, the corresponding change on our Form 5003, the eligibility determination form, where you have updated instructions to specify that you can include facilities that are 10 years old for those projects that have received a federal grant. So the instructions just make it clear that you can do that. And one other edit on this one. This particular change on page 47 of the PDF, this is not related to Proposition 2. This is just from staff's recommendation based on our experience in validating the 5003 enrollment. We added a box or added a couple rows down on to capture CBED's enrollment year. Every year enrollments can be updated by school districts, but to keep track of what forms and what enrollment's being reported, we decided to add the years so it makes it easier for us to go compare to CBED's when we validate the information. It makes it easier to track the form from year to year as well, to beyond the signature date. To clear what enrollment year is being reported on the form. So just a couple of lines added for that part. And then not shown in this particular item, we will amend the grant agreement as well, because the grant agreement does specify what you can do. We'll do it in the next item where we do other changes to the grant agreement just for consolidation of reg purposes, but basically the grant agreement will be updated to specify that portables must be replaced with permanent facilities if they are using the eligibility based on the 10-year allowance. And I think we have a couple questions. Oh, Josh had a comment for everybody. Josh basically stated that new construction eligibility lock is not required to be updated during the entire 5-year period. But you can update it if you'd like to, if you have changes that would increase your enrollment. You wouldn't want to do it, obviously, if it dropped it. But if it looks like your new construction eligibility goes up, you can update it. Thanks, John.
Yeah, in fact, I would recommend it. If you think it's going to go up, you should see if it does, and then lock it in. You might take advantage of that because if you don't file it, you can't file retroactively. So
We have a couple questions down here.
Okay, go ahead.
Alana Cunningham first.
Hello, I have another big picture comment, and that is right now, unless a district is a small district, new construction eligibility that's submitted to establish new construction eligibility for a district isn't processed until there's a funding application on file. And I can understand that for updates, but it would be helpful if there was some kind of provision included in the regulations that would require OPSC to process new construction eligibility when it's being established, so that if a district submits new construction eligibility and they wait for 10 years to submit a funding application, when OPSC does the site visit and they may determine that some classrooms should have been counted when they weren't, and the district is waiting, assuming that that's their eligibility when it's not, and then 10 years later they realize that the classrooms weren't counted correctly, etc. So it would be helpful if OPSC could process new construction eligibility when it's being submitted as an establishment and not wait for a funding application to be on file, just so that the district has a good starting point in terms based on OPSC's site visit.
thanks, Ilana. Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. We do make an effort to process all the small school district applications that come in, even the updates, regardless of if we're processing a funding app or not. We like to get those locked in as soon as possible, and we always will honor those. You just might end up getting a lock for a little bit longer if we don't get to it in that same enrollment year. But we've been doing our best to maintain. I think, though, you're not talking just about small districts, right? You're talking about any district that's establishing.
I'm addressing larger districts
Okay.
Where it isn't processed until there's a funding application. And it would just be nice to understand what have the baseline confirmed before they come in for a funding application.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. We have Lori Ruiz.
Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. I have two questions. One is, what is the rationale behind the 10-year modernization eligibility for military installation schools that receive federal funding? And then the second question is regarding the dating of modernization eligibility baseline. I was seeing some information being presented at previous workshops that talked about Prop 2 would require an update of the baseline eligibility. Is that something that might be discussed later on as well?
Yeah, so for the first question for the military base school projects, we've seen basically since around 2012, the State Allocation Board has been actively involved in doing what they can to assist school districts that have federal military base projects. There was a variety of stakeholder meetings back in 2012, and the board is very limited. And the state as a whole was limited. Where you have smaller states with a lot less schools, in those states when there was a federal grant program, the states, because they didn't have nearly as many schools as California did, would just basically write a check, to cover the 20% match for the district's project. State of California couldn't do that, and that was kind of clear by the State Allocation Board and the legislatures back in 2012 that we're limited in that ability to just write blank checks for a very small universal schools when California has over 10,000 schools. But the board decided whatever they can do within their purview, within the program rules that were allowable, they would try to do that. So over the course of the last 10 years, the board has done what they can by accelerating projects, skipping ahead of the line, really considering other evidence appeals when there's something within the program that was kind of allowable that they could help school districts out. A lot of the federal requirements for these grant programs are different from the state requirements for modernization. The federal program is not a big fan of portables at all, but if a district touched them under our program previously, they weren't eligible for modernization eligibility again for 20 years. This was the legislature's attempt to kind of help those out, but still get the district their matching funds in a way that's through the program. just earlier than they normally would be. And that's why they added the condition too, that if you're going to replace them, they'll at least do them with per permanent classrooms, which is in alignment with the federal grant. So it was really to help those school districts out to get their match.
Great, thank you.
And then your second question for modernization eligibility. Right now, there's not a refresh of the modernization eligibility as a result of anything within Prop 2. And as it looks like right now, including the with the submittal master plans, we take our regs and statutes are still in place for the snapshot concept of our program. We've taken a picture of all the buildings on your campus and the ages of the building, and they age accordingly to that 20 to 25 years, and we track that going forward. You do modernization eligibility updates, though. Whenever your enrollment increases, you're allowed to update your eligibility. And we highly recommend districts do that when your eligibility starts to peak. Make sure you submit enrollment eligibility updates to us. Even if we don't process them, you want to submit them to us so that we can work on those and eventually count it toward your baseline.
Yeah,
Great.
especially if your eligibility, if your your enrollment is going up, you should lock that in.
Great, thank you so much for that clarification.
Mm-hmm.
And then Christopher from LAUSD has his hand raised. Christopher, you have something to say?
Yeah, hi, Michael, Brian, Chris, LUSD. Just comment on the 5003. I see the language in option B, 213 about the military installations. We believe that should also be on option A, 213. Because we do see the asterisk right there, but what if the site is not a military installation? So
Okay. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And then also on I know the year was added, but staff could get easily confused by just putting like a calendar year there, like they could put 2025. So maybe clarification, maybe say school
Enrollment
year.
year. Yeah.
Or enrollment year. Just so that confusion doesn't happen, because I might put 2025 there, then confusion 24, 25, 25, 26.
Thank you.
Appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then, Michael, I have a comment from Samer in the chat. It says, given that larger districts like LAUSD tend to aggressively pursue available grants, is there any safeguard in place to ensure that smaller districts still have access to adequate funding? Additionally, has any language been added to prioritize or allocate additional funds to disadvantaged districts under the modernization grants? Any insights or resources you can provide would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, so that's where the small schools. Well, first, I would, for LA's benefit, they do not get the lion's share of the money. They have a lot of pupils, and if you look at the per pupils, the funding for the SFP per pupil, LA is not even the top 10% of the program, and I believe they're not even the top 20% of the program for per pupil. But they do have a lot of pupils, and a lot of schools. But to help out small school districts, just from a capacity standpoint, that's where the new small school district program will come into play. Where the board last month at the January board meeting, they set aside $330 million out of the new construction pot and $400 million out of the modernization pot, specifically for small school districts. So they carved out the maximum allowed in statute and under Prop 2 for small school districts specifically. And we'll get into this in more detail at the February 13th meeting, but that basically will reserve that bond authority for those small school districts. We envision an application form process to the board as long as you have new construction or modernization eligibility, and that bond authority becomes saved for you for 5 years or 4 years with an option to extend for 1 year if you meet certain criteria. So we'll go into more detail on that on the next meeting though. But that is the intent of that program, to help small school districts out.
Thank you for that question. Any other questions before we move on?
All right. Let's see, topic 3. This is another broad item that covers all of the Proposition 202 in terms of eligible expenditures. Across Proposition 2, there are areas in the legislation in AB 247 that added new facility types that would be eligible that you can spend money on, solar and green components and what have you throughout. So this item is just incorporating all that into regulations and to the grant agreements. So on page 48 of the PDF here, This kind of summarizes what's in statute. Most of it should be verbatim, I believe, of exactly what changed in statute for new eligible expenditures. Some of this was eligible already, but Proposition 2 just kind of formalized it and actually spelled it out more explicitly. But a lot of this was already allowable as well. But under new construction expenditures for broadband access, internet access, design material costs for the state's energy goals, seismic mitigation. The newest one is this bottom bullet here, though, the construction grant. You can take your new construction grant, and it makes it clear that you can help build kitchens, TK facilities, and new for this one is actually the school program as well, that if you're building preschool facilities. Under our core new construction program, your eligibility is based on TK through 12 enrollment. Preschool kids are not counted in that projection, and there wasn't a way to build those facilities. But what you're essentially doing in this, and by allowing this, is you're using your T12 eligibility, but housing preschool kids. And there'll be you'll see coming up a certification to acknowledge that change there. So those are some of the new ones that are new construction. Under modernization, quite a bit of expansion there too, especially with all the new supplemental grants that are under Proposition 2. So this item, all the supplemental grants will be discussed. We have one today for the 75-year-old building supplemental grant, but at our February 13th meeting, we are covering a lot more of the supplemental grants and how they will work and how you get funded from a process standpoint and documentation. What this item is doing, though, is incorporating those into regulation now to already specify you can spend the money on that. Even if you don't get the grants, you can still spend the money on that. So under modernization, these top bullets are the same ones that were in new construction. So nothing really changed there. A lot of these already allowed in the program, just more explicit. New under these bottom two bullets have to do with the new supplemental grants as well. So under a modernization project, typically you can do like for like replacement, but you can't grow in size. Modernization is typically intended for modernization type work, HVAC, but you were allowed to replace buildings. You were not allowed to build brand new facilities that did not exist before, though. And then the changes in Prop 2 allow it now, with some disclaimers. They also provide a supplemental grant for that. So we'll go into more detail when we talk about that in 2 weeks, but we're changing the regulations now to say, hey, you can now spend modernization for increasing the capacity for these different options like the library, gyms, and multi-purpose room. So, and then 77.35 was amended. I'm adding all the school energy efficiency components, being explicit that those are allowed as part of modernization expenditures. There will be a new energy efficiency grant that we'll talk about in 2 weeks as well, to cover increased costs for energy efficiency. But this item is to build it into the grant agreement now and to the regulations that you can spend money on all this stuff. And these should be word for word, I believe, from statute in this particular case. Flip ahead to the actual reg section changes. Oh, no, I mentioned that in one of the prior items. So military installations, that'll be built in the grant agreement that you must replace your portables with permanent classrooms. So we have that here. 55 is the next one. I think I overlapped pages. On the bottom of page 54 is the intro for this, but on the application for funding, the 5004, we are going to add a new certification. We didn't mock the form for this purpose just because it's one bullet, but this is what the certification would look like. We would like school districts, when they are building preschool classrooms with new construction funding, to acknowledge that they are using TK eligibility, TK through 12 new construction eligibility to house preschool classrooms. So if you're going to do that, the board needs to acknowledge that from a state's perspective, those TK to 12 pupils are considered housed now. Another requirement of doing a preschool, just like our TK FTK program, the district must administer the preschool program. You're not contracting out for it, it's for district run programs. And then lastly, for the third bullet, the district certifies they'll meet Title V and Title 22 requirements. Now the intent behind that is twofold. Under Title 22, it's to make sure you meet the preschool requirements to house kids there. Title V is if we're going to spend new construction SFP money to build a preschool classroom, we want to make sure this classroom is usable for other K-6, the rest of your school too, should your enrollment shift. So we don't want to be so limited in what you build that you can't do anything else with it. So we do require that certification as well. And we do, since sometimes it is hard to tell on plans, we do want to you guys to specify how many classrooms are being used for preschool purposes on that form. So I see a question for Alan.
First of all, thank you, Michael. I had a quick question back on page 49. There was the couple of subsections that referenced that if the district is apportioned funds pursuant to 1707.316A, that you shall use those supplemental grants for expanding those facilities. In the real likelihood that the supplemental grant will not be sufficient to perform all of the work, it appears that's written to preclude the use of your base grants to build those same facilities. And can you clarify that? I just want to make sure that if the cost exceeds the supplemental grant amount, that you're able to use your base grant in order to build those additional facilities, because it doesn't appear that it's worded that way.
Yeah, and when we get to the February 13th meeting, we'll go into this more detail. We have some charts and graphs. We intend to kind of show how that will work. But under the current modernization program, as you generate new modernization eligibility, you can touch any building on site from a modernization purpose. You don't have to spend it on the building that actually generated the modernization.
But this may be a new facility. That's my concern.
So the intent behind this change is really to specify if you're getting the supplemental grant, you're using that supplemental grant for the explicit purpose of expanding that particular facility or constructing a new one, depending on which grant you get. There's two ways to do that calculation. So if you are expanding an existing facility, it works much like the mod program. You would use your base grant to fund any modernization work done in the existing. This will be hard. We get that. Essentially, you'd be spending your base grant on the main building that existed before. You'd have to spend that supplemental grant to do the expansion. If you go above and beyond that, or cost or beyond that, that'd be just like the existing mod program now, where it's locally funded. So the supplemental grant is intended to the gap in funding for that expansion cost. Yeah, and we will go more into the weeds of that one when we talk about that grant specifically on the 13th.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So in this particular item, we're just saying you can do this work though. Yeah,
no, I understand. I guess my question was, in the very likelihood that the supplemental grant is insufficient to cover the full cost, what you're telling me is that becomes a local funding issue, as opposed to being able to utilize your existing grants to supplement that funding.
Yeah, we can look at that more when we talk about that future item. If the base grant, I don't believe our intent was the base grant stays the same as it is now, where you can't use the base grant for expansion work, only the supplemental. But we can take a look at that more in detail.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions on that one? All right.
No questions here.
Ed. Oh, did you say no questions? Sorry.
There is one in the chat. It says, regarding the money for lead remediation, we are concerned that, one, there's no money for testing, and only schools who have already tested their outlets and found results above 15 ppb can apply, missing the schools who need this money the most. Two, it is not clear if money can be used for ongoing maintenance of filters and training of staff to do maintenance. And three, there is no public or comprehensive tracking or testing results and remediation methods. This lack of monitoring is a concern across all eligible expenses. Are there plans to address any of these in regulations? We'll be bringing forward the lead remediation topic and all those issues. We'll be discussing the whole thing at a future meeting. I think it's planned for later this year. I'm not sure if we're able to answer those just quite yet, but it is something that we're going to be bringing forward as its own topic at a future meeting.
Yeah, Proposition 2 added a new lead and water, we're for sure we're calling it lead and water program, but it provides for the testing and remediation of lead in water on school sites specifically. And at the January State Allocation Board meeting, the board did take action to carve out the maximum allowed in statute, 115 million, for that purpose, for both testing and remediation. So, like Brian said, we are developing that one now. That one will be a later item. Right now, based on our December projections, somewhere around the early July is when we first do a stakeholder meeting on that brand new program. We're hitting the core program changes first because we're getting applications actively for that one now. But as part of that process, the stakeholder will work on all those criteria in terms of testing and how the funding works and the filing rounds and all that kind of stuff. So a lot more detail to come on that particular one. But there is 115 million set aside now for it, and we won't touch that until that program opens. Yeah, Michael. Or Michael Gold specifically.
Mr. Gold, you'll need to unmute.
Thanks. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay. In attachment A3 in the grant agreement, section 5, items Q and R, they don't seem to allow for costs for lead testing. And also, it's unclear how Q and R differ from each other. Comment on those 2 points?
The lead and water program will be a separate program. So it'll most likely either have its own grant agreement or its own criteria. That's probably why you're not seeing it in this item. Up page of the PDF, you're on that fan. Let's go ahead and do it. Q and R. Construction costs, you might be on, Michael.
Section 5, Q and R.
3. Oh, 3.
There it is.
I gotcha. And your concern is that it doesn't specify testing specifically?
It doesn't, yeah, it doesn't, what's here does not appear to allow for cost attributable to lead testing. And then also item Q and item R, it's not clear how they differ from each other. Is that just a redundancy?
We could take a look at that. This one is a copycat sheet restatement. We could take a look at that one and see if we can be more explicit. I think testing is intended in there. It talks about in statute the control, management, or abatement of lead. And testing normally I know is allowed in our new construction project. It would probably be allowed here. We'll take a look at the language and see if we should update it more clearly. I think the intent behind it is a little more broad. Anything related to that, water outlet remediation. But we can probably clarify that a little bit.
Michael?
And that,
Oh, go ahead.
and then maybe I missed it, but I didn't see how you addressed the relationship between Q and R.
The statute had two bullets. It split them out as two separate.
Oh, okay.
Explaining what was allowable under the program, so we copied that.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I see what we actually reversed the order that was in statute, but yeah, there are two bullets in 17-074-25 for that one.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
We'll take a look.
We have a couple of questions down here.
Yeah.
We'll start off with Jamie.
Good morning, everybody. It's Jamie King Eisman with King Consulting. I think it's prudent and timely as we're talking about eligible expenditures for modernization, and I didn't see it anywhere on any of the stakeholder agendas or in any of the communications to potentially include on a future agenda the discussion of second round modernization eligibility for portable classrooms and what the eligible expenditures are those.
Yeah, so second round modernization expenditures will be as part of, I believe, the February 20th planned stakeholder meeting. It's not announced yet, but that's our tentative date internally that we're targeting for second round mod. As part of that one, we intend to amend the grant agreement for that particular things like requiring the replacement of a portable with a permanent classroom is one of the requirements that will be updated in the grant agreement for second round mod. Yeah. Did you have any other questions regarding eligible expenditures that will be regarding second round mod that we might need to include in advance?
Not right now, but I'll save them for the next meeting. Thanks, Michael.
Okay. Yeah, no.
And we have another question from Sasha.
Okay.
Folks, I've got a more global look at eligible expenditures. And one thing we're interested in looking at is what are the opportunities for an increase in the square footage on modernized buildings. So it's not just a one-to-one replacement. In particular, we think of how a modernized kitchen can shift from a 400 square foot room with a warming shack to need to be a full kitchen that has about 100 or 1,000 square feet. And we want to make sure that's allowable. And also with classrooms, there may be old classrooms that are grandfathered in lower than the 960 square foot rate. And that would need to be increased to meet modern class size required in today's code, and want to make sure that's allowable.
That's definitely something that's on our radar. Yeah, we currently, you know, I'm sure you're aware we have certain criteria that is allowable to expand so far as like for like using modernization funds. But we think there's going to be some expansion there with some of the things that you've mentioned, the kitchens, and I know there were some other things that are not coming to mind right at the moment, but there's some other things that we were looking at to also expand that.
Yeah, for classrooms, if they are compliant at the time they were built, at the moment, there's not a mechanism to expand it, and there isn't in Proposition 2 either. But at the, I believe, February 13th meeting, we're planning, if we get that far, there's a new grant for minimum essential facilities. And we look at your enrollment at the site, the size of your facilities for those gyms and other minimum essential facilities like your kitchen. And if it doesn't meet the minimum in reg, then we'd be able to fund that gap and the expansion cost in there. And right now we're currently looking at something like replacement costs because it is new construction work for that. So those will be back at a subsequent meeting, and we'll explain how the math would work and how we're calculating what you'd be eligible for under the modernization program to get supplemental grants for minimal essential facilities.
Yeah, Josh reminds me too, we've also been discussing how it interacts with Title V requirements. That's something else that we're considering as well.
Down here.
Okay. Make sure I cover these before agreements. Fine, right to that one. Oh, the last thing I want to mention for the grant agreements, we are handling 2 universals of projects that we're processing. Projects received before and on October 30th of 2024. They are still subject to all the old rules of the program. And projects received October 31st and later are subject to new rules. Right now, our grant agreement is a master template that's used for all projects that are received prior to October 30th. We envision a second grant agreement version for the projects received after. So depending on when your application is received, you'll get one of the 2 templates. So there will be a brand new grant agreement in our regs with this new language. All these new underlying languages that we're proposing here is only for apps received after October 31st of 2024. So, something to be watched for when you receive that on your application. All right. Any other questions on just more global allowable expenditures under the SFP? All right. Well, Take a look at those questions like the ones from Michael, see if we can just make those changes to make it cleaner for the board. Probably not need a second stakeholder meeting just for that. We can make those corresponding ones, but if we decide not to, we'll keep you informed otherwise. All right. The third topic or fourth topic we're talking about today is the new matching share requirements for the school facility program. So as I mentioned earlier, under the new construction program, it's a 50-50 program with the state taking up 50% of the total project costs and the school district picking up 50%. Modernization with the state being 60% and the school district picking up 40%, unless you qualify for financial hardship. Proposition 2 provided a mechanism to shift those percentages for 4 different criteria. So up to 5% of the district share would be covered now by the state, depending on how many points you earn on your particular application. It is application specific because of some of the criteria in there, such as project labor agreements. So we're calculating that each time that you go through. Depending on how many points you have, it is a sliding scale. So anywhere between 1 and 5 percentage points can change on a shift of funding there. So we'll talk about those points briefly if you're not familiar with them. And these are all explicit in statute. So all we're doing in these regulations is mirroring what is in statute for the points purposes and what your matching share is. The only thing that's really new for as far as stakeholders are concerned is really our application for funding, because in order to calculate a lot of these points, we need additional information from the school districts. Here's how the points are determined. We look at gross bonding capacity per full enrollment at the site. And I'll go more in detail in the calculation on the subsequent pages, but there's a 4-point range for this one. All right. If you don't give us the information, you automatically default to the lowest amount of points. So there will be a number of boxes on the application for funding and built into OPSC Online to capture this data so we can calculate it. But if you don't get to it, you don't get the points. More points will shift more percentage to the state share of funding. So it is to your advantage to provide us the information. Unduplicated pupil percentage, 2 through 8 scale for that one as well. If your district enrollment is less than or equal to 2 points, or 100 pupils, you automatically get 2 points. And then lastly, if the project includes the use of a project labor agreement, points. If you don't give us a copy of that agreement, then you automatically get 0 points. So we will validate this at the time of funding. If you haven't contracted yet, you plan to do it, you can still get the 2 points at the time we process the application. It will be validated on the back end to make sure you actually move forward with including a project agreement in your project. So we try to account for both reimbursements and new projects in that mentality. Yeah. Going into the weeds a little bit farther. Oh, right. Based on the number of points you get, these are how the sliding scale shift, a 50-50. The lowest points being less than 6 points. It stays a 50-50 project. But as you move up 6 or 7 points, it becomes 51-49, and then it goes all the way up to 55-45 for new construction. Mod, same thing. If you have 5 points or fewer, you stay at a 60-40. Your percentages shift accordingly as you go up. So how we will calculate this, gross, and some of this was spelled out in the December board item we're expecting for applications to be submitted. The first is your calculation of your gross bonding capacity. Your gross bonding capacity depends on your district type. So on the new application for funding, we are going to be asking for a letter certifying from your county assessors what the AV is for your school district. If you are a non-unified school district, your bonding capacity is equal to 1.25% of that amount. If you're a unified school district, it's equal to 2.5% amount. Whatever that gross bonding capacity comes out to, we divide that by your total enrollment, and that becomes your gross bonding capacity per enrollment that we use for your point calculation. We are not aware of any widely available source that we can just hop online and look up everybody's AV across the state. So it would have to be provided by the school district, what your local county AV is. And this will be determined at the time we process your application. So not necessarily when you submit, when we process it, we calculate it going into the board meeting. Is 93, we kind of example out there just to kind of spell out how the math works. The statute does specify when you round and don't round. So we've included and accounted for that too, in terms of the amount. Unduplicated pupil percentage, we will ask for that amount on your 5004. The amount we have met with CD to determine the statute is explicit in terms of how that, where that number comes from. So we have met with CD to see, is it publicly available information? And they gave us a link that's available in your PDF to their website. It'll be live data essentially. And whatever's there is what we're using for your unduplicated pupil percentage. There's a variety of spreadsheets you can download, and there's actually a column listing your unduplicated pupil percentage, and that's what we're using for the purposes of our program pursuant to statute. So it should be well known when you apply what that is, but again, we double check it at the time we process your application. And then based on that, we determine how many you get. Under pupil enrollment of 200 pupils or fewer, you have 200 or fewer, you get the 2 points. Pretty straightforward. We go by what's off your enrollment reporting to us on the SAB form 5001. That means you do include all these pupils. The list here that we've provided in the item is 5001, so it's just a copy and paste there. But all we pull straight off your form. If you're 200 or less, then you'll get that. And then lastly, project labor agreement. On the form, it'll be a yes or no. Do you have one, or do you intend to have one? If you have it, we'll ask you to upload a copy to OPSC online or attach it to your application, and then you get those 2 points as well. And then we run through the calculation in the rest of the exam. Pause there before I get to the form for questions. In the chat, Brian, you might have to answer this one. If a charter school is not for profit, but instead is a public school as district dependent charter, not a 501c3, is there a chance to get the points? Charter school is not for profit. Public school as a district. Eileen, you might have to clarify. You mean if a district dependent charter applies to the program specifically?
Yeah.
Or...
Yes, sir. We had applied under Prop 51. Mueller Bayfront Charter School is a district-dependent charter school. There's a handful of charter schools in the Chula Vista Elementary School District that are district-dependent. They're part of the district's LEA, they're public schools, but they are not independent 501c3s. We applied in Prop 51, and because we did not have a 501c3, I believe we lost 40 points off the bat, but would have qualified on every other account at that during the application. So we understand that you want to exclude for-profit charter schools, but we're sort of a unicorn in California, as most charter schools are 501c3s, but we are not, but we're part of our district. We are not a for-profit, and we're part of a district-dependent charter school.
Okay, I see. So you're speaking to the charter school facility program specifically.
Specifically, we were advised we should apply both ways, like first as a charter, and then maybe we're in a district facility, by the way.
Mm-hmm. So two things. So the points scales and the changes of the matching share we're talking about only apply to SFP new construction and modernization projects. Those can only be applied for by school districts and county office of education. Charter schools that are applying on their own, we do have a charter school facility program that has $600 million allocated to it. That filing around right now is tentatively scheduled to open up at the beginning of May.
Okay.
There's no sliding factor that are accounted for in that part. The points and priority points for that, and Aaron can speak to this in more detail. The points are specific to that section only for that particular program on how
Okay,
you qualify. But yeah, that is the competitive program for that purpose. We will have a webinar probably, we're targeting end of February, early March. That is
okay,
specifically for the charter school facility program. So in that webinar, we will go through all the application requirements. We will go through how all of the points work and specify that. Proposition 2 did not make any changes to the sliding scales or the match components for that particular program though.
okay, thank you.
Yeah. And so stay on the email list for when we advertise that webinar, because there won't be a stakeholder meeting. It's more presentation, but it will be Q&A.
Okay, thank you.
We have a question down here.
Okay.
Sasha?
Hi, just looking for a technical clarification. Under the local matching share determination, it's unclear if transitional TK students are supposed to be considered as part of your K-12 calculation. I'd assume they are, but it references a K-12 calculation only.
Yes, you can include your TK enrollment as part of your kindergarten enrollment when you report it on the 5001 if you're updating your eligibility. Also, we're planning to bring forward, I think this is scheduled for the February 20th meeting. We're going to bring forward some provisions to break out TK as its own grade level on the 5001. So that's something that we've developed, and we're going to be presenting that out to everybody very soon.
Any other questions? No other questions.
Thank you, Lisa. Let's see. So let's say we'll go up to the regulation.
Yeah, Michael,
Yeah,
I did have one quick question again, Alan
Yeah.
Rising. It more about the process here. I'm wondering if there's been some conversation about when in the processing of these applications, all of this data will be determined. You know, we just recently found out that with the latest round of submittals, our modernization program is now already overprescribed. And so clearly applications will be backlogged in the system for quite some time, and this data may adjust over the years that they sit on the list waiting to be processed. So is there some thought to when some of these numbers and data would be fixed? Because I could see them shifting significantly over a period of time.
Yeah, so let me pull it up really quick just to make sure I have the right chart.
Really good question, Alan. Thank you.
At the December board meeting, the board kind of adopted some policies on how we would accept applications and continue to do that. So for the matching share component specifically, because there's this gap in time of when we process applications, we set out right now when we're ready to process application about 6 months in advance of when we think we're going to be ready to process it. We actually sent out a notification to school districts and let them know we're about to process your application and we need these kind of documentations. So when we're ready to process those applications at that time, our intent is to ask for this information. And that's in the December item.
Thank you, because I see a very real possibility that while an application is waiting on the list to be processed, a school district could do something like pass a local bond, which could change their AV number and significantly increase their state share, as well as other factors being considered here could adjust. So what I'm hearing is that we would be afforded the opportunity to update these numbers something around 6 months prior to the applications being processed.
Yeah, I would even say afford. I would say you'd be required to update it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Required. Yeah. Thank you.
With the caveat of things like project labor agreement. If you don't give it to us, you're not going to get the points. But yeah, AV, getting an updated county assessor letter, all that kind of stuff, that would be expected to be processed during that window leading up to the board meeting for your application.
And then just one other caveat. So small school districts would be allowed to lock in their data for a period of up to 5 years, correct?
They can lock in their new construction eligibility. They don't lock in their matching shares. So right now, and we'll talk about this more again when we do the small school district program, I think we envision that at the preliminary apportionment, we try to tie up as much bond authority as we think your project needs based on your eligibility. But when you convert, just like under the charter school facility program, we do a true up on everything you're eligible for based on the plans that you actually have, you know, for site development or utilities, whatever may be included in your final application, we would have to true it up. And that, I think that includes the matching share component as well.
So we'll have a future opportunity to talk about that.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Thank you.
Question in the chat: what is the criteria to qualify for a small school? Small school is defined in our regulations as a school district with an enrollment of 2,500 or fewer students, based on what's put on the district's form SAB 5001, your enrollment report to us. All right. The regulations are on stamp page 105 of the PDF. So there are some parts where we do have to clarify for applications before or after October 31st of 2024 on who the matching share components and points apply to. You'll see that in 77.1 and also the corresponding one for modernization as well. 106. 106 is basically a copy of what's already in statute for explaining that we will do a matching share split based on those receive dates, those applications. So this is only for applications received on or October 31st, 2024. And then on the application for funding, the 5004, where we need to capture the additional information. So we are going to insert before the current section 22, we're going to add another 22 and slide everything down. But for our purposes of capturing the local matching share determination. So you're going to input the district's total assessed evaluation. These are the instructions. District's gross bonding capacity. We'll explain in the instructions what the math is for that, kind of what we outlined before. And then the corresponding sections after that just kind of get renumbered. So there will be 4 boxes or 5 boxes, I believe, on the 5004 to capture this information. And we are building this into OPSC Online as well, so you can put in the details there as well. All right. Any questions there? All right. There's one other component that is not in this item. So this will have to come back at least one more time for discussion, most likely. Proposition 2 made changes to the seismic mitigation program matching shares. So previously, the seismic mitigation program drew strictly from, well, it was created by Proposition 1D back in 2006. And it was a set aside of up to, I think, $999.5 million out of new construction pot specifically. So it was always new construction funded, and as such, it was always a 50-50 project. As we rolled forward to Proposition 51, it was kind of silent on it. But in interpretation of the original program and how it was created and the nexus into Proposition 51, we continue to draw down seismic projects from the new construction pot on a 50-50 basis. Proposition 2 made explicit changes to education code. Our new construction projects, based on your cost benefit analysis, same one we do now, if the cost to rehab the facilities is more than 50% of the cost to replace them, then you qualify for new construction funding and you are a 50-50 project. It added a provision though, if the cost to remain in the facility is less than 50%, you're considered a rehab project funded out of the modernization program, and you are a 60-40 project. So we found in our and reading the statutes and that section more explicitly, we realized we do need to change our regulations for that component, but we weren't ready in time for this meeting. So we'll bring that back to a future meeting to show you what those corresponding reg changes will look like. Yeah, Michael.
Hi, I'm not sure whether you've gotten to this yet, but I have a question regarding the authority for applications received on or after October 31st, 2024. Okay. For Education Code 17072.30 A, there's, I don't know if this is a typo or I'm just not understanding something. The penultimate line in paragraph A says that the required matching funds must be in an amount at least equal to the proposed apportionment. That seems to be inconsistent with the sliding scale, the point-based sliding scale. And the same problem comes up for regulation 1859.77.1 and 1859.79. That the first of those specifies a matching share on a dollar basis for new construction, and the second of those mentions a matching share equal to at least 40% for modernization matching share requirement. So if I'm not misreading this, there's seems to be an inconsistency with the point-based sharing arrangement that that AB 247 and Prop 2 implement.
We could take a look at that one. The first section you threw out was 1772.33.
The first one was 17072.30A.
We could take a look. I don't. Yeah, we could take a look. A seems pretty clear to me that you use the point scale and adjust the local contribution that's required in the 72.10. So 72.10 is the 50-50 part, but then this section says adjust the amount in that section. So I don't know if there's a conflict, but we can take a look.
Okay, and the other two were 1859.77.1 and 1859.79.
In our proposed regs, you mean?
Yes.
7.9 is a matching share requirement for mod.
And right now, there's three components. If your app was 2002 or earlier, this is an old reg. You're an 80-20 project. April 29th to October 31st, you're 60-40. And then after October 31st, you're based on the sliding scale. So this is just to correspond to the statute.
Okay, I don't think we're looking at the same thing. The printout that I've got says for 1859.79 says, this is paragraph B, says that any modernization grant plus other funding authorized by these regulations shall require a district matching share equal to at least 40% of those amounts, which combined with the state's modernization adjusted grant shall represent 100% of the total project cost.
Right. Yeah, that's an old regulation. It basically specifies it's a 60-40 project.
But this is in the section of the document that deals with applications received on or after October 31st.
For B, we're making amendments that it's that sub B for 79 is going to be for apps now received between April 29th, 2002 and before October 31st of 2024. It'd be a 60-40.
Oh, I see.
We had to create a new window basically. So we're adding the extra date in there so that we have 3 windows of time basically.
Okay. Okay, I'll take another look at that. Thank you.
And we'll take a look at statute again to see if we see if there's any other conflicts in there too from our side.
Yeah, I think what's happening here is that what you're displaying on the screen is not the same as what was provided in attachment A4A. That's the because I'm
Oh, the statute.
yeah, okay, that's more like what you just displayed shows what I'm talking about.
Yeah, these are all the existing regs as they are right now. And then this is what the change would be too. And then
Okay.
this is the new statute for modernization that specifies that while it was 60-40 before, now we're going by the point space scoring system. So this is the new Prop 2 statute as it exists today. So take a look too, though. And
Okay, I'll take another look at that. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions on this one?
No questions down here.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, now I'm going to hand it off to talk about the modernization grants for 75-year-old buildings.
Morning, everyone. Thank you. Proposition 2 adds the new Educational Code 17074.265, which provides a modernization grant to demolish 75-year-old facilities and construct facility space as like-kind project. Next page, please. Similar to how 50-year-old grants are being provided, the 75-year-old grant will be provided in lieu of the regular modernization per pupil grant. This ed code stipulates that the 75-year-old grant amount will be based on the new construction per pupil grant. To verify that the building is 75-year-old, the age of the building will be determined using the same methodology as applied to the standard SFP modernization eligibility. This ed code also provides more state fundings toward replacing 75-year-old facilities instead of modernizing it. This is different than how regular modernization funding is being used. Whereas regular modernization funding can be used toward modernizing or like-kind replacement projects, the 75-year-old grant can only be used on an existing school site to demolish and replace a specific building that generated the 75-year-old eligibility. 75-year-old work can be part of a combined hybrid project that also includes modernization work using regular modernization base grant and or 50-year-old grants. However, regular modernization grants and the 50-year-old grants cannot be used toward the work associated with the 75-year-old building. Requesting the 75-year-old grants for reimbursements of projects that are already completed is possible, except for the following type of work. If the building was replaced using local funds and was not 75 years old at the time it was demolished. Next page, please. And if the building was already replaced in any state-funded project. We propose this in order to prevent double funding. Districts will be required to provide the following as part of the funding submittal to determine if it's an eligible scope of work. Districts must submit plans showing the demolition of 75-year-old buildings. Staff will review the plans and to determine that the buildings were indeed 75-year-olds at the time of the demolishment. Districts must also submit DSA-approved plans showing the construction of building space. Staff considers that the building term mentioned in the ed code pertains to only permanent buildings and not to portable buildings, as there are existing provisions in place where second round of modernization funding is provided with an emphasis on replacing portable buildings. Whereas 50-year-old funding can be used toward any work throughout the campus, the work associated with the 75-year-old grant is building specific and has to be the very building that generated that eligibility. Modernizing the 75-year-old building is not an eligible scope of work to receive this type of grant. Lastly, districts must also submit a cost-benefit analysis known as a CBA that will confirm that the cost to modernize the building is more than 50% of the cost to replace it. This cost estimate to modernize must be broken down into a unit cost that conforms to the Sierra West Red Book for modernization at F1 level of difficulty. We propose to use a similar method that is used in the facility hardship program to calculate the total replacement cost for the cost benefit analysis. Next page, please. As you can see, this table itself on this page represents how the cost benefit analysis is to be calculated. Simply, we take the current replacement cost based on the current construction cost index multiplied by the existing square footage of the 75-year-old building. And that's going to equal to the total replacement cost. Identifying the 75-year-old building will be determined by using the original site inventory snapshot of the modernization eligibility establishment for that site. Eligible establishments are used to verify the age of the permanent building. The permanent building may contain classrooms and/or ancillary spaces. The way the funding will be calculated will be dependent upon what is being constructed back. Next page, please. Since the purpose of the 75-year grant is to demo and construct, we propose the same guideline is to be followed in the same fashion as replacement of like-kind projects that are being processed in the modernization program. Like-kind replacement project has the following caveats. Eligible modernization work that includes like-kind does not allow the construction of more classrooms or facility space than what was originally there. For 75-year-old projects, districts can demolish the classroom and construct in like-kind the same number or a lesser number of classrooms. If the original classroom space was demoed and they are being replaced with non-classroom ancillary spaces, then that grant is going to be calculated based on the ancillary spaces. If the project does result in an increase in classroom, there will be an adjustment to the new construction eligibility baseline to account for the new construction capacity that is added to the school site. If the build back adds more square footage to the school site, the increase, like all like-kind projects, is also going to have to be locally funded. Now let's talk about how this grant is being calculated. And it is based on the type of spaces being built back. So for the eligible classrooms, if classrooms are being built back, the 75-year-old grant will be calculated by simply taking the number of classrooms that are being constructed, multiplied by the loading capacity, multiplied by the new construction base grant. The 75-year-old grant for eligible ancillary spaces that are constructed back will be calculated using a method that we always apply for the replacement of minimal essential facilities. Next page, please. So you can see an example here of how the grant funding is to be calculated for ancillary spaces. We take the number of the square footage that are being like-kind replaced, and we multiply it by the other replacement amount that we see from the annual cost construction index to get the total allowable 75-year-old grant. Now for both ancillary and classroom space, please turn to the next page. We have an example showing how we calculate it for both types of spaces that are being built back. First, we determine how many classrooms are being constructed. As you noted, I commented and stated that the number of classrooms being built back cannot exceed the number of classrooms that were demoed. So we'll limit that to the number of classrooms that were demoed if there are more classrooms being built. We take the classrooms and we use the calculation method that we apply for the classroom calculation method. And then we separate the ancillary spaces from the classrooms that are being built back. And we use the ancillary spaces and we apply the ancillary spaces calculation method. We separate them too, then we add them both together to get the dollar amount that would be qualified for the 75-year-old grant. As we stated, the 75-year-old grant is being provided using new construction per pupil grant amount. Staff proposes that since the funding provided is using new construction per pupil grant, the 50 utilities cannot be requested in addition to the 75-year-old grant, as a new construction per pupil grant already accounts for many things, including site development. In addition, staff proposed that because buildings are being demoed and replaced, similar to many other programs that we have currently in-house, such as the overcrowding relief grant, the program and also locally funded projects, that there should be an amendment to the existing regulation 1859.61 to account for the demolishment and replacement for 75-year-old buildings. Please note that this amendment is not going to modify the fact that the mod eligibility snapshot will not change and the total room square footage inventory will remain the same. Last page, please. The ramification of the amendment is that the age of the demo building will be reset to the apportionment date of the 75-year-old project through a one-time adjustment to the modernization eligibility. This is going to ensure that the site continues to generate modernization eligibility the same way without any change. This concludes my presentation of the 75-year-old item. We welcome any questions at this time. I think I saw a lot of questions being asked while I was presenting. We do have some feedback ready prior to the meeting, and we are looking into them.
Thanks, Candace. I don't see any current questions. There was one question of do the 75-year-old replacement grant replace 50-year-old mod grants? And I replied that no, we're still going to have 50-year-old grants as well. Oh, here's a question. 75-plus-year-old building housing 6 TK/K classes. Each class is 960 square feet. Replacing the building and incorporating new regs for 1,350 square feet and toilets is going to drastically increase the square footage. How are these costs covered? Let's see.
We do the calculation separately. I'm assuming you're talking about the classrooms itself. For the classrooms, we separate them from the ancillary spaces, and the classrooms are calculated per the base grant that you're at. So we don't take note of the square footage, except for the fact that it does have to be Title V, and it is a classroom. It meets the definition under new construction. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, so I think what Clay's getting at is, would we allow for the expansion of that extra 400 square feet or so based on Title V requirements?
This is a like-kind project, so our current programs that if you build more than the classroom, then we do not provide funding for the additional one. I think that's a good question, and I think that's something that we are going to take back and kind of look into as well. But
yeah, I can't remember. I know we've discussed that internally. I can't remember where we landed on that, so that's something that we'll make sure to address the second item.
Yeah, when it comes to extra square footage, there are some parameters, but that's something we're going to definitely collect and take back into for a future discussion.
Yeah, I mean, historically, modernization funds are not intended to expand space, except for in certain aspects of what's allowable in regulation, what's outlined in regulation. Right now, I believe it's limited to access compliance requirements and a few other things. But it's something that we're considering for this, so we can definitely address that and discuss it a little bit further next time.
We do have a question down here. Sasha?
Okay, so to answer your question, we are using the modernization eligibility establishment. So if funds were used with lease program funding in the 90s, then yes, the clock will be starting based on when modernization eligibility considers to be the starting age of that building. So even though it might have been constructed in, let's just say, as an example, 1940, and there was lease purchase program funding, then the starting age of the 75-year-old will be based on the LPP, or if the modernization was established based on the DSA approval date. We follow the same parameters that's in the regulations, so that's how we are viewing it for the age of the building.
I think you just answered my question.
Thank you.
You have one more question? Hold on.
Good morning. My name is Ramon Hendricks. I'm the superintendent in Greenfield Union School District in Bakersfield. You have some information regarding a school site in Greenfield that meets this requirement. It is an older school site from the 1930s, 1940s. All of the buildings that we are talking about were built in the 1940s or 1950s. And we are requesting that the regulations be drafted to allow us to replace these buildings, but at another site in the district. And there are several reasons for this that include having a state highway right to the east of the campus. In 1940, the requirements were different for gymnasium facilities, band room facilities, and with 21st century education, we kind of need technology upgrades and infrastructure upgrades to make it all work. The school is landlocked, so we can't expand on the school site to do what we need to do, and temporary housing for the students during the modernization would be an issue. We do have a site that is in a location nearby where we could replace this school at a less cost than it would be to modernize the current site. So our request is that the regulations include language that would allow us to replace these buildings at a different location within the district.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Yeah, I spoke to Laura Moffett about this just recently. Thank you for coming down today to participate. We really appreciate you coming in. So historically, modernization funds are site specific, and up until this point, the program has never allowed for them to be moved to another site without an appeal to the state allocation board. And those are usually in cases that are pretty unique situations, or sometimes it's happened during natural disasters, things like that. It sounds like you have a pretty unique situation in your case, and I think that's probably something that would be appropriate for the appeal process and to have the state allocation board weigh in on. That said, we are in receipt of your request. I have the information that Laura sent over, and we'll be incorporating this topic into the next meeting. We didn't quite have time to incorporate it into the item for this time, but that's something that we'll be considering and looking at very carefully. My initial take is that it's probably something that's better reserved for an appeal, but we'll take a look at it and we'll give you a little bit more of a firm response on that at our next meeting.
Confirm. Thank you.
Thank you. There's another message in the chat from Clay. It says, regarding project labor agreements, if a district is choosing the lease back delivery method that requires a skilled and trained workforce, which I think exceeds 60% of the trades currently, is that equitable to a PLA? I'm going to have to defer to someone else on that question. I am not sure of the answer to that. I don't know if we know. Maybe that's something we could work on and respond to Clay.
Yeah, we might have to look back into that one. That's not normally something that we would weigh in on.
Yeah, yeah. We'll try to help you out that one, Clay, offline from this meeting. Thank you for the question.
No other questions down here.
Okay. While we're waiting on other questions to come through, wanted to just say that I wanted to thank everybody again for participating today, but also, it looks like we're getting close to a conclusion here. We're at about 2 hours. Today was 5 topics. I'd call these topics for the most part pretty straightforward. At our next meeting on February 13th, we have 6 topics, and they're a little bit more nuanced than these. Not all of them, but some of them can potentially be. And so I wanted to encourage everybody to review those items before the next meeting, especially if they're of interest to you. We want to try to get as much feedback as we can, and we've got a lot of really good feedback today. So I thank you for that. But I just want to kind of throw that out there for the next meeting. It's going to be we're going to have to be going from one topic to another pretty quickly to get them all in. And so I wanted to make sure that we're getting as much as we can in. If we need to, we'll carry some topics over to the subsequent meeting to February 13th, but we'd like to get through at least kind of first blush on all 6 of those topics if possible. So I'd appreciate you taking a look beforehand and being ready to ask any questions you might have. Mr. Gold. Go ahead, Michael. Michael Gold, I see your hand up, but we're not hearing you if you're speaking. Okay. Any other questions? For those of you that are in attendance today, a couple of us are going to roll down there in a few minutes when we kill the Zoom. So we'd like to say hello, and then if there's an opportunity, maybe we can answer some questions down there too. Okay, let me see if I can unmute you, Michael. Looks like you're off mute now. Are you able to speak? I'm not quite sure why it's not coming through. We heard you loud and clear earlier. You're definitely unmuted, so I'm not quite sure what's going on. If we're unable to hear you before the end of the meeting, please feel free to call one of us or reach out via email. Craig, the next stakeholders meeting is, yes, February 13th at 9 a.m. It'll be similar to this. We'll have availability in the building for if you wanted to come in person, and then we'll be doing it via Zoom. That's the case for all these meetings right now.
All right, just a reminder, I have it on screen, the email address to our OPSC communications team. They'll be the central repository for all questions and comments. If you have any that you weren't able to speak to today, or you think of something afterwards, or even anything you want us to consider as we head into the next stakeholder meetings as well in advance of us finalizing those items. We'll go back now to our desks. We'll take a look at all the comments received, see which ones we need to bring back and address more. Some we might be able to handle offline. Some of the questions like PLA, that might be something that may not be, for the purpose of this item and what meets PLA, doesn't need to be addressed in regulation necessarily. It'd be handled more from a kind of a policy side. So we might not have to bring those kind of things back, but we'll take a look at all the comments and see what's needed. And anything addressed, we'll make sure gets included. For those of you new to our stakeholder process, the entire stakeholder meeting agenda item, as we present those to the board, we attach it in full to the board meeting agenda so they know exactly what was presented. If we have follow-up stakeholder meetings, we will usually include like a table acknowledging all the comments received. And anything we choose to incorporate, we'll explain why we are incorporating them. And anything we choose not to incorporate, we'll explain also why. And those reasons will all go to the board too, so they kind of see the full dialogue of what happened. Again, if you want to go back and review any of the presentation in this meeting, it should be on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days to view there. Comments, please send to our communications team, though. We are asking for comments by February 14th at noon. You can just shoot an email to that address with your comments, and we'll take a look at them and see if we need to bring something back to a second stakeholder meeting or something that can just be included in the actual state allocation board agenda item, which at the earliest would probably be the March board meeting at the earliest that we present anything for regulatory approval there. And like Brian mentioned, next meeting, February 13th, we expect that notice. Hopefully it will go out either later this week or early next week. And the full agenda, we still intend to publish at least a week in advance as well for review.
Yeah, and in case you didn't notice, somebody asked if we'll be posting these recordings. They'll be posted, I believe, on our website, but also on our OPSC YouTube page. It's OPSCU. So we encourage everybody to like and subscribe, smash the like button. And you can hit the bell for notification too, I think is what they say. So yes, and Sarah, these slides are available. I'll put that link back in the chat. And those are on our website as well under the meetings tab.
On our website, there is the resources page. It has been down for several days now. It's a larger DGS issue and not just OPSC, so they are actively working on that. We apologize that. Fortunately, this is on our meetings page. We will look at creating, if we haven't already, on our resources page, a Proposition 2 specific, so that you have a one-stop shop for all our videos too. And on YouTube too, we actually usually create a playlist just for all the topic specific ones too. So we can do that as well to make it easy to find all these meetings. All right, with that, I think we can wrap. Thank you again for all your attendance and your feedback. We definitely appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you on the next one.
See you guys soon. Thank you for the collaboration.